Um, right now, commercial ships are willingly paying millions of dollars to a designated terrorist group.
Yeah, just to literally travel through international water.
Right. And the most shocking part is that the global financial markets are practically begging them to do it.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. I mean, if you want to know why your gas bill or, your grocery receipt might double next month, it basically comes down to a Danish shipping company trying to avoid being blown up by an Iranian drone.
Exactly.
So today is Friday, April 3, 2026. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us today. We're talking frontline dispatches from the Middle East, maritime trade analysis, and some heavy inside the Beltway political reporting.
And looking at all this material together, we are observing this massive dual-front collision.
Yeah.
The engine of American foreign policy is just being pushed to its absolute limit in this historic war abroad. But at the exact same moment, the mechanics of that very engine are being completely dismantled and rebuilt at home.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to map out this chaos. We are looking at how a hot war involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran is violently colliding with this unprecedented simultaneous leadership purge in both the Pentagon and the U.S. Justice Department.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the state of global stability right now, you have to look at how a crisis in the Persian Gulf dictates what happens in Washington and vice versa.
All right.
And that starts with a pretty drastic shift in the sky. Over the past month, the U.S. and Israel have conducted over 20,000 airstrikes over Iran. And up until today, the U.S. had managed this astonishing operational record.
Yeah, zero-man planes lost.
Exactly. Not a single human pilot had been lost.
I mean, we did see equipment go down prior to this.
Yeah.
The sources note 16 MQ-9s were lost. Those are the unmanned Reaper drones.
Right, the drones.
Yeah. And on March 19th, an F-35A took some shrapnel. But the F-35 is a highly advanced stealth fighter, and that pilot managed to survive with only minor wounds, never going down behind enemy lines. Up to this point, the war remained sterile. It was basically a war of machines and infrastructure.
Until a few hours ago, a U.S. fighter jet has officially gone down over central Iran.
Yeah.
This is the first known loss of a jet inside the country since the war began. And right now, there is a frantic search and rescue operation underway.
A really tense one.
Yeah, because Iranian state television is actually broadcasting rewards for the crew's capture, provided they are taken alive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And you have regular civilians in their personal cars actively hunting for this pilot alongside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Unbelievable.
So what does this all mean? We go from weeks of absolute detached air supremacy to a visceral manhunt on the ground.
It's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism of a hostage scenario compared to a bombing campaign.
Right.
When a war is fought at 30,000 feet, it remains an abstraction. You are targeting radar arrays and munitions depots. But the moment an American pilot is literally running through the desert...
Being hunted by civilians.
Exactly. Being hunted by civilians and state forces, the calculus shifts entirely. For Iran, capturing a pilot alive isn't just a tactical win. It is immense psychological leverage.
It's a massive propaganda victory.
Yeah, they can parade them on television. For the U.S. military, the priority instantly morphs from projecting power to a desperate, high-stakes rescue. The risk of rapid escalation skyrockets because the stakes are now flesh and blood.
And that flesh and blood reality is expanding beyond just a rescue mission, because this down jet is happening exactly as President Trump is ordering thousands of Marines and airborne troops to the Middle East.
Right.
It's a huge signal that a ground invasion could be on the table. The sources point to a few very specific potential targets. The U.S. might be eyeing Karg Island, which is Iran's main oil export hub.
Right, highly strategic.
Or other islands in the Strait of Hormuz, like Abu Musa.
Which means the U.S. is not just looking to bomb infrastructure anymore. They are preparing to physically seize the terrain that controls the global energy flow. But Iran is fully anticipating this. They are carving extensive tunnel networks into these islands right now.
Wow.
They're laying mines, booby-trapping port facilities, and positioning guided missile systems all along the coast. And crucially, they are stockpiling FPV drones.
Those cheap first-person view ones.
Yeah, the wire-guided FPV drones that have totally revolutionized modern combat.
Well, there is a former Russian Air Force officer in our sources, Lev Irisov. He worked directly with Iranian forces in Syria. And he laid out the math on what an amphibious assault would actually look like against those specific defenses.
And it's not pretty.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He warns that any U.S. landing would require over 100,000 troops stretched along the shoreline. And even then, they would face massive casualties. The phrase he used was chilling.
Yeah.
And on top of those geographical defenses, Iran is mobilizing people, like around 1 million troops. They just launched a massive domestic campaign called Janfada, which translates to sacrifice.
Leaning heavily into the nostalgia of the grueling 1980s Iran-Iraq War. And the methods of this mobilization show just how existential Iran views this threat. The Revolutionary Guard is recruiting children as young as 12.
Wait, really? 12?
Yes, 12 years old, to man checkpoints and provide logistical support. We are already seeing tragic reports from human rights groups that children have been killed while staffing these positions.
That is awful. You know, reading through the domestic reporting inside Iran, I was struck by how the threat of a U.S. invasion is actually uniting a profoundly fractured society.
Yeah, the internal politics are shifting.
Right. There is this prominent activist, Azam Jangravi. She fled Iran after bravely protesting the compulsory veil. Originally, she was on record favoring the bombing of Iran's leaders. She wanted the regime gone.
Right.
But the second the U.S. threatened an actual occupation of Iranian islands, she flipped.
Yeah.
She stated that territorial integrity is an absolute red line. It sounds like Iran's overarching goal isn't to actually win a head-to-head battle with the U.S. military. They just want to become an unswallowable porcupine. They just want to make the U.S. choke if they try to take these islands.
That's a great analogy. The porcupine strategy is really the core mechanism of asymmetric warfare. Iran knows it cannot compete with the defense budget or the technological superiority of the United States.
Right. A symmetric jet-for-jet battle would be suicide.
Exactly. So they leverage friction. They use punishing a mountainous terrain. They use intensely loyal proxy militias. And they rely on a fleet of hundreds of heavily armed, swarming fast boats.
Like the ones that captured those U.S. sailors back in 2016.
Yes, exactly like those. The goal is to inflict a level of pain, both in human casualties and global economic disruption, that forces the United States to simply give up because the political cost back home becomes too high.
And if we talk about global economic disruption, Iran's defensive porcupine strategy on land extends directly to their most powerful offensive weapon on the water.
The Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz. Right now, this waterway is entirely bottled up. There are 20,000 seafarers literally stranded on their ships. Just to visualize this, the strait used to see well over 100 massive ships every single day.
Carrying what, a fifth of the world's oil?
Exactly, 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply. Today, only a handful of vessels are moving through, and they are doing so by sailing directly into Iranian territorial waters and paying a hefty toll to Tehran.
Which is wild. And Iran's parliament is currently advancing legislation to formalize this practice. They want to mandate tolls for all passing vessels and outright bar any nations they deem unfriendly.
Wow.
Yeah, they are attempting to frame this legally by comparing this strait to the Suez Canal in Egypt.
Okay, but that's not the same thing at all.
Right, that comparison falls apart under international maritime law. The Suez is a man-made canal running entirely through sovereign Egyptian territory. The Strait of Hormuz is a natural international passage.
Right.
Furthermore, Iran only controls the northern shore. The southern shore belongs to Oman.
Regardless of the law, they are enforcing the toll. And Washington's response has been kind of dizzying. President Trump has tweeted that the U.S. will blast Iran to oblivion until the strait is open and free for commerce.
Right.
But almost simultaneously, in a speech, he explicitly noted that the U.S. doesn't actually rely on Gulf oil anymore. He suggested that Europe and Asia, who do rely on it, should be the ones to go in and open it themselves.
And that messaging is causing sheer panic among the Gulf states.
Well, absolutely. Saudi Arabia is desperately rerouting their oil exports through pipelines across the desert to the Red Sea. The United Arab Emirates is moving oil overland to Fujairah and Khorfakkan to bypass the strait entirely.
Because the global energy artery has been pinched shut and literally no one knows who is supposed to reopen it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I want to push back on how these tolls actually function in the real world.
Okay.
The waterway is controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They are heavily sanctioned and officially designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. and the European Union.
Yes, they are.
So practically speaking, wait a minute. How can any global shipping company in Denmark or Japan actually pay this toll without getting completely cut off from the global financial system? It's a total catch-22. Why wouldn't the U.S. Navy just escort these commercial ships through the strait like they did during the tanker war in the 1980s?
That's the core issue. It's because the nature of the threat has evolved. In the 1980s, the Navy could easily track and deter conventional gunboats or aircraft.
Right.
Today, the threat comes from thousands of cheap, highly maneuverable FPV drones and advanced anti-ship missiles hidden in coastal caves. Providing a watertight escort for a slow-moving, massive oil tanker against a drone swarm is incredibly difficult.
And probably not worth the risk of a U.S. destroyer taking a direct hit.
Exactly. This leaves the commercial ship owners in an impossible bind. Maritime law professor Jason Chu frames this brilliantly in our sources. He points out this isn't a transit fee, it is a loyalty test.
A loyalty test that functions as an economic trap.
Precisely. If a commercial ship owner refuses to pay the toll, they risk having a multi-million-dollar ship and its crew blown out of the water by an Iranian drone.
Right.
But if they do pay the IRGC to ensure safe passage, they're officially funding a designated terrorist organization. They violate U.S. and EU sanctions, and they risk losing access to Western banks or conducting business in U.S. dollars ever again.
Wow. It is a legal test no commercial entity can pass.
Right. If this standoff persists, shipping companies will simply stop sending vessels to the Middle East, which would permanently reshape global energy security and supply chains.
Which brings us to the domestic reality. Because to execute a war of this unbelievable complexity, managing a fallout of a downed pilot, planning an amphibious assault against a coastline rigged with drones, and navigating an unprecedented naval blockade, you need absolute rock-solid continuity in your military leadership.
You really do.
You need the people who plan the operation to execute the operation. But our sources reveal that back in Washington, the U.S. military command is in a state of unprecedented upheaval.
The turnover at the very top of the Pentagon right now is staggering.
It is. We just saw Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth oust the Army's top general, General Randy George. And General George was forced into early retirement without the Pentagon providing a single operational reason for his removal.
And look at who is replacing him as the acting chief of staff.
Right, General Christopher Leneve, who happens to be Secretary Hegseth's former military aide. And this is not an isolated retirement. Hegseth has systematically removed the top military commanders across the board. The heads of the Navy, the Air Force, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Coast Guard, Cyber Command, they have all been removed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the mechanism of what actually happens when you wipe out the top brass during an active conflict.
Yeah.
The military is not just a collection of soldiers, it is an incredibly complex, highly sensitive administrative machine. When you swap out a four-star general, you aren't just replacing one guy at a desk.
You are upending the entire administrative staff.
Exactly. You reset the strategic priorities, the procurement pipelines for weapons, the communication protocols with allied nations.
To use a sports analogy, this is like firing your entire coaching staff right in the middle of the Super Bowl. How does a military maintain operational focus during a hot war when the entire top brass is being swapped out?
That is exactly the logistical friction we are seeing. The foundational architects of the very war they are fighting in the Middle East are suddenly gone. Maintaining the intricate machinery of a multi-front war while simultaneously dismantling the leadership apparatus overseeing it, it creates an operational vacuum.
And we are seeing how this shift in leadership priorities trickles down to the micro level, too. Recently, Hegseth explicitly overruled Army officials to protect helicopter pilots who were facing suspension.
Right, the Kid Rock incident.
Yeah, they were facing suspension because they buzzed the home of the musician and vocal Trump supporter, Kid Rock. It really highlights this intense contrast. You have a military trying to figure out how to navigate 100,000 troops onto an Iranian beachhead, while leadership back home is expending bandwidth to intervene in a disciplinary matter involving a celebrity's house.
It illustrates a fundamental restructuring of what the military leadership values. Operational continuity is facing heavy competition from the administration's specific cultural and domestic mandates.
And that tension between institutional continuity and political mandate is not confined to the Pentagon. On the exact same day the Army's top general was ousted, the president fired the top law enforcement officer in the country.
Yeah, the domestic priorities are heavily competing with the war effort.
Exactly. The purge of the military is happening concurrently with a massive shakeup at the Department of Justice.
We are looking at the sudden firing of Attorney General Pam Bondi.
And the details of this firing are almost cinematic. Bondi was let go during a 2-mile limo ride with President Trump on their way to the Supreme Court.
Unbelievable timing.
The president simply announced online that she was moving to the private sector. She is set to be replaced on an acting basis by Todd Blanche or possibly Lee Zeldin. But what is wild about this is reading the list of actions Bondi took during her brief tenure to align the DOJ with the president's vision.
She took unprecedented steps that fundamentally altered the visual and functional landscape of the Justice Department.
She literally hung a massive banner of President Trump's face on the outside of the DOJ headquarters. She oversaw the firing of numerous prosecutors.
Right.
She attempted to prosecute political targets identified by the president, including former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James.
Though a federal judge ultimately threw those cases out.
Right. The judge ruled that the prosecutor behind them was unlawfully installed, but the DOJ pursued them anyway. Bondi even authorized federal investigations into the 2020 election in Fulton County, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Yet, despite utilizing the apparatus of the Justice Department to fulfill these political mandates, she was fired.
Yeah.
The reporting notes the president's frustration stemmed from two areas. First, he was deeply unhappy with her handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Which is a whole separate controversy considering Bondi is currently under subpoena by a Republican-led House committee to testify about those exact Epstein files in a closed-door deposition on April 14th.
Exactly. And second, he felt the pace of these prosecutions against his adversaries was simply too slow.
Which is such a paradox. She literally hung a banner of the president's face on the Justice Department and prosecuted his political rivals, but she still got fired for not being aggressive enough. It really makes you wonder what the baseline expectation for the next Attorney General will be.
This raises an important question about the structural philosophy of the Justice Department moving forward. Historically, the DOJ has functioned as an institutional buffer. It was designed to maintain a degree of independence between the president's political desires and the actual execution of the law. What we are witnessing now, echoing the fates of former AGs like Jeff Sessions and William Barr, is the systematic restructuring of that buffer.
Wow.
The baseline expectation for the next Attorney General is no longer historic independence. It is a total fusion of the president's political will and the DOJ's prosecutorial power.
When you zoom out and look at all of this together, the sheer scale of this shift is staggering. And for you listening, why should you care? Because you are watching a historical collision.
Absolutely.
We are watching the fundamental rules of global trade and energy supply being violently rewritten by drones in the Strait of Hormuz. We are watching an American pilot being hunted in the Iranian desert. And at the exact same moment, the foundational institutions of the U.S. government, the military chain of command, and the federal justice system are being fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt simultaneously.
Which leaves us with a final overarching reality to consider. If global shipping companies are forced to choose between surviving the U.S. financial system and safely navigating Iranian waters,
Right.
and if the U.S. military and legal systems are undergoing total domestic purges during an active global crisis, who is actually enforcing international law right now? And what happens when the rest of the world realizes that no one is?
It is a terrifying, fascinating thought. The plates are shifting everywhere at once, both overseas and right here at home. Keep your eyes open, keep questioning the headlines, and thank you for joining us on today's Deep Dive.